My father suspended me for correcting my sister's false promise to a client, so I cleared my desk and resigned. The company soon collapsed into crisis while I took a better job and walked away for good. The conference room fell silent after my father delivered his verdict. Around the mahogany table sat the company's board members, my sister Natalie, looking smug beside my father and me, standing at the head of the room where I've been presenting my quarterly report. Suspended, I repeated, making sure I'd heard correctly. Until you apologize to your sister for undermining her authority, Dad said, his voice carrying that tone he used when he thought a decision was final. 2 weeks without pay should give you time to reflect on appropriate workplace behavior. Natalie adjusted the designer blazer she bought with her expense account and tried to look wounded. The attempt might have worked if I hadn't spent 30 years learning to read her expressions. Behind the manufactured hurt triumph gleamed in her eyes. The incident that sparked this circus happened 3 days earlier. Natalie, as head of client relations, had promised a major account that we could deliver a customized software solution in 4 weeks. The actual timeline was 12 weeks minimum, something she would have known if she'd bothered to consult with me or anyone in the development department I've been running for 6 years. I'd sent an email to the client explaining the realistic timeline, copying my father as CEO and Natalie as a courtesy. Professional, straightforward, necessary to prevent a lawsuit when we inevitably failed to meet her impossible promise. Natalie had stormed into my office, calling it sabotage. Now here we were with Dad taking her side because he always took her side. All right, I said. The simplicity of my response seemed to catch everyone off guard. Dad had clearly prepared for an argument, probably spent his morning mentally rehearsing his points about family loyalty and chain of command. That's it. Natalie couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. You're not going to fight this. You want me suspended, I'm suspended. You want an apology, you'll get one. I gathered my presentation materials with steady hands. Is there anything else, or can I go clean up my desk for the next 2 weeks? Dad frowned, apparently unsettled by my compliance. We'll expect you back on the 15th, ready to move forward professionally. I nodded and walked out, ignoring Natalie's satisfied smile and the uncomfortable shuffling of the board members who'd watched this family drama unfold during what should have been a routine business meeting. My office had been my sanctuary for 6 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Portland, and the walls held my degrees from MIT, alongside awards the development department had won under my leadership. Photos of my team celebrating product launches lined one shelf. Another held prototypes of every project I'd guided from concept to completion. I'd built something here. The development department had tripled in size during my tenure, and our division's revenue had increased by 340%. I'd recruited top talent, implemented processes that other companies now copied, and created a workplace culture where people actually wanted to come to work. My father had founded Morrison Tech Solutions 40 years ago, building it from a 2-person operation into a company with 300 employees and clients across North America. He'd worked 18-hour days, sacrificed relationships, poured everything into making it successful. Then he handed increasing amounts of control to Natalie, who contributed mediocre ideas and excellent manipulation skills. The family dynamics had always been complicated. Natalie was the firstborn, riding 2 years before me, and she spent our entire childhood competing for Dad's attention. Every achievement I earned got dismissed or minimized. Honor roll became expected rather than praised. My acceptance to MIT got overshadowed by Natalie's engagement announcement the same week. Mom used to try to balance things, making sure I knew my accomplishments mattered. She died from a sudden stroke 7 years ago, 3 months after I joined the company. Without her mediating presence, Dad's favoritism toward Natalie intensified. I started packing my personal items into boxes, working methodically through drawers and shelves. My degrees came off the wall first, wrapped carefully in bubble wrap. The awards followed, each one representing late nights and problem-solving sessions and breakthroughs that had seemed impossible until they weren't. My phone buzzed with a text from James, my second-in-command in development. What just happened? Natalie's telling everyone, you're suspended. I typed back, taking some personal time. You're in charge. Trust your instincts. More texts arrived from team members, but I silenced my phone and continued packing. Each item I wrapped felt like shedding weight I'd been carrying without realizing how heavy it had become. The stress of constantly defending my decisions. The exhaustion of proving my competence to people determined to doubt it. The disappointment of watching my father choose Natalie's ego or the company's welfare. All of it had accumulated into a burden I'd normalized. Sarah from my team had sent 3 messages asking if I was okay. Marcus, one of my best developers, wanted to know if this was really happening. Even people from other departments were reaching out confused by Natalie's triumphant announcement that I'd been dealt with appropriately. The company grapevine had always been efficient, but watching it work in real time showed me something I hadn't fully appreciated before. People knew. They'd seen Natalie's incompetence, witnessed her taking credit for work she hadn't done, observed the pattern of her making promises that my team had to scramble to fulfill. They'd noticed Dad's favoritism, even if they'd never said anything directly. My phone rang with a call from Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister. She was the only family member besides Mom who'd never really seen the dynamics clearly. After Mom died, Patricia had tried to maintain a relationship with both Natalie and me, but the balance had become increasingly difficult. I answered this one. "Hey, Aunt Pat, your father just called me asking if I talk some sense into you," she said without preamble. "He seems to think you're having some kind of breakdown." I told him that suspending you for doing your job was probably the stupidest decision he's made in 40 years of business. Despite everything, I smiled. How did he take that? About as well as you'd expect. He hung up on me. She paused. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Honestly? I think I'm better than I've been in years. Is that weird? Well, not even a little bit. I watched you try to earn his approval your entire childhood. I watched him dismiss every achievement and excuse every one of Natalie's failures. Your mother and I talked about it constantly, how worried she was about both of you for never being enough, Natalie for never having to be. The validation hit harder than I'd expected. Mom never said anything to me about it. She didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between acknowledging the problem and protecting your relationship with your father. She kept hoping he'd figure it out on his own. Patricia's voice softened. She'd be proud of you for walking away. She always said you were stronger than you knew. We talked for another 20 minutes, Patricia filling in details about conversations with Mom I'd never known about. Apparently, my mother had been documenting the favoritism for years, keeping a journal of incidents where Dad treated Natalie and me differently. She planned to confront him about it eventually, but the stroke had come first. "Do you still have Mom's journals?" I asked. "I do. She asked me to keep them safe. Said someday you might need to know you weren't imagining things." Patricia hesitated. "Do you want them?" "Yeah, I think I do." After we hung up, I sat in my empty office thinking about all the years Mom had quietly witnessed the imbalance, seen my hurt, understood the damage being done. She tried to compensate by being my champion, celebrating my victories when Dad wouldn't, listening to my frustrations when I couldn't voice them anywhere else. Losing her had removed the only buffer between me and the full force of Dad's favoritism. The past 7 years without her had been progressively harder, each incident more painful because there was nobody left who would validate my reality. The framed photo of my team at last year's holiday party went into a box. The ridiculous World's OK Boss mug they'd given me as a gag gift got wrapped in tissue paper. Beneath a stack of technical manuals, I found a card the team had given me after we pulled off an impossible deadline 2 years ago. Inside, they'd all written personal notes thanking me for protecting them from unrealistic expectations and fighting for resources they needed. "You never throw us under the bus," Marcus had written. "Even when it would be easier," James had added, "best boss I've ever had, you actually listen." Reading through those messages now, with the office stripped and my career here ending, I realized I'd built something more valuable than Dad probably understood. Loyalty earned through respect rather than demanded through hierarchy. A team that trusted me because I consistently prioritized their well-being over my own convenience. Professional relationships based on competence and mutual support rather than favoritism and politics. Natalie had the title, the corner office she'd been angling for, and Dad's unwavering support. What she'd never managed to build was credibility with the people who actually did the work. By late afternoon, my office looked bare. 6 years of my professional life fit into 4 cardboard boxes and a rolling cart. I'd expected to feel sadness or anger, but instead a strange calm had settled over me. The thing about being undervalued for your entire life is that you eventually stop trying to prove your worth to people determined not to see it. I'd spent 3 decades hoping Dad would recognize my contributions, acknowledge that I'd inherited his work ethic and business sense, maybe even indicate that he was proud of me. Clearly, none of that was happening. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. The resignation letter took 20 minutes to write, though I've been composing versions of it in my head for months. I kept it professional and brief, thanking the company for the opportunity and providing 2 weeks' notice for my contract effective immediately. Then I opened my email and started a new message. The recipient list included every board member, all department heads, and several key clients. The subject line read, Development Department Documentation and Project Status. I'd always been meticulous about documentation. Every project had detailed files outlining timelines, resource allocations, budget considerations, and technical specifications. Every team meeting had notes. Every decision had a paper trail explaining the reasoning behind it. I'd also documented every time Natalie had made promises without consulting development, every impossible deadline she'd proposed, every budget she'd blown on unnecessary expenses while demanding my team make do with less. Professional documentation, nothing personal, just facts and dates and email chains. The email took 2 hours to compile. I attached spreadsheets showing the revenue generated by development versus other departments. Project timelines comparing estimated completion dates I provided versus the dates Natalie had promised clients. Budget analyses demonstrating how resources were allocated across divisions. I included the email chain from the incident that had triggered my suspension along with 6 other similar situations from the past year where Natalie had made commitments without consulting the teams who would have to deliver on them. One particularly damning attachment showed a project from 8 months ago where Natalie had promised a client a product in 6 weeks. Development had estimated 16 weeks. Dad had sided with Natalie, insisting we could meet her timeline. We delivered in 14 weeks, but only because my team had worked 60-hour weeks, and I personally covered the overtime costs that went over budget, taking a pay cut to make the numbers work. The client had been satisfied. Natalie had taken credit for the successful delivery, and nobody except my team knew what it had actually cost to make it happen. My finger hovered over the send button. This would burn bridges, destroy my relationship with my father, eliminate any possibility of reconciliation with Natalie. Everything I built here would be reduced to a cautionary tale about family businesses and poor management. I pressed send. The second email went to a recruitment firm I'd been in contact with 3 months earlier, back when I'd first started seriously considering leaving. They'd reached out about a position leading the technology division at a competitor, and I'd politely declined because of family loyalty. Funny how quickly loyalty evaporates when it only flows in one direction. Hi, Jennifer. I'm ready to discuss that opportunity we talked about in August. If the position is still available, I can start immediately. The third email went to a lawyer I consulted with last year about contract details. Donald, I need to review the non-compete clause in my employment agreement. Can we meet tomorrow morning? I already knew what the clause said because I'd written it myself during the company's legal restructuring 4 years ago. It prevented me from working for direct competitors for 18 months, but the definition of direct competitor was narrow enough to leave plenty of options. The contract also included provisions I'd insisted on that most employees didn't have, including full vesting of my stock options, regardless of employment duration, and a severance package that triggered under specific circumstances. Getting suspended without cause qualified. By 6 o'clock, my office was empty and my car was loaded. I took one last look at the space that had been mine, then walked out without looking back. The house I'd bought 3 years ago sat in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from the office. Small by executive standards, but it was mine, purchased with money I'd earned rather than inherited. The mortgage was manageable, the garden was peaceful, and the neighbors were friendly without being intrusive. I carried the boxes inside, poured a generous glass of wine, and settled onto the couch with my laptop. The responses to my documentation email had started arriving. The first was from Robert Chen, the company's lead counsel. Call me immediately. Gregory Winters from the board. We need to discuss this information. Can you come in tomorrow? 3 clients forwarded my email to their account managers with questions about project timelines. 2 of them specifically mentioned concerns about commitments Natalie had made. James from development. Holy, is this real? Everyone's freaking out. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened a bottle of better wine and ordered Thai food, feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone rang 47 times that evening. Dad called 12 times. Natalie called 8. Robert Chen called every 30 minutes like clockwork. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages grew increasingly frantic. Dad's first voicemail was angry, demanding I call him back immediately and accusing me of being unprofessional. His second was confused, asking what I thought I was accomplishing. The third was almost pleading, saying we needed to talk about this rationally. Natalie's messages went straight to threats. She accused me of trying to destroy the company, of being jealous, of betraying the family. Her final voicemail dissolved into tears, claiming I was ruining everything Dad had built. The irony was almost funny. I'd spent 6 years contributing to what Dad built, while Natalie spent the same period coasting on his reputation and making messes other people had to clean up. Robert Chen's messages were more measured but increasingly urgent. The legal implications of the documentation I'd shared had apparently become clear, and he needed to discuss my intentions. I slept better that night than I had in months. Morning arrived with continued silence from me and continued chaos from everyone else. The calls had evolved into text messages, emails, and even a visit from my father's assistant asking me to please contact the office. I sent one reply, a group text to Dad, Natalie, and Robert. I'll be in at 9 o'clock to collect my final belongings and submit formal paperwork. No discussion necessary. Jennifer from the recruitment firm called at 7:30. The position is still open, and after seeing your portfolio, they want to fast-track the interview process. Can you meet with the CEO this afternoon? Absolutely. The second call came from Donald, my lawyer. Your non-compete is narrower than I remembered. You have options. Come by at 11 and we'll discuss strategy. Perfect. I dressed carefully for the office, choosing a navy suit that projected confidence without aggression. Professional, composed, ready to end this chapter cleanly. The parking lot was fuller than usual for 8:30 in the morning. Apparently, word had spread and people wanted to witness whatever happened next. I walked through the lobby with my head high, carrying a leather portfolio that contained my resignation letter and several other documents Donald had prepared last night after I'd emailed him the situation. The executive floor was chaos. Assistants huddled in corners, whispering. Department heads stood in doorways looking worried. The energy felt like everyone was waiting for an explosion. My former office door stood open, and through it I could see Natalie sitting at my desk, rifling through the drawers I'd already emptied. She looked up when I appeared, her expression shifting from frustration to anxiety. You had no right to send that email, she said, standing up quickly enough that my former chair rolled backward. You've made me look incompetent in front of everyone. The documentation speaks for itself, I replied calmly. Not entering the office, I simply provided information about project timelines and resource allocation. If that makes you look incompetent, perhaps the issue isn't with my email. Her face flushed red. Dad's going to fire you for this. You've destroyed any chance of coming back. I'm not coming back. I held up the portfolio. I'm here to make it official. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Dad appeared, Robert Chen close behind him. My father looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight, his face drawn and his suit rumpled in a way I'd never seen before. My office now. He turned without waiting for a response. Actually, the conference room would be more appropriate, Robert said quietly. This has moved beyond family matters. The same conference room where I'd been suspended yesterday now held an entirely different energy. The board members weren't present, but Robert had brought a paralegal who set up a laptop to record the proceedings. Before we begin, Robert said carefully, I need to clarify that this meeting is being documented for company policy regarding employment matters. Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but Robert's expression stopped him. My father might run the company, but smart executives listen to their lawyers during potential legal situations. I'm resigning effective immediately, I said, sliding the letter across the table to my father. Per Section 7 of my employment contract, suspension without documented cause triggers the severance provision. I'm also exercising my stock options per Section 12, which allows immediate vesting upon voluntary departure following disciplinary action deemed inappropriate by outside counsel. Robert winced. He clearly already read my contract and knew exactly what provisions I was citing. You wrote those provisions yourself during the restructuring, Dad said, slowly, realization dawning across his face. I did. At the time, you called me paranoid for including them. Turns out I was just prepared. Natalie had followed us to the conference room and now stood in the doorway. This is blackmail. You're trying to extort the company. Exercising contractual rights is an extortion, Robert said quietly. These are provisions she negotiated in good faith 4 years ago, and the company agreed to them. How much? Dad's voice had gone flat. The tone he used when calculating business losses. The severance package is 6 months' salary. The stock options are currently valued at approximately $430,000 based on yesterday's evaluation. I kept my voice level, professional. I'll also need my complete personnel file documentation of all projects I led and references from the 3 board members who served on the development of her site committee. And if we refuse, Natalie's hands were clenched into fists. Then I refer you to Section 19, which outlines the dispute resolution process. It involves arbitration, which would be expensive, time-consuming, and public. I met my father's eyes directly. I'd prefer to handle this cleanly. I've already secured another position. I'm not interested in dragging this out or causing additional damage to the company. Additional damage? Dad's voice rose. You sent confidential information to clients and board members. You've undermined your sister's credibility. You violated about a dozen policies regarding information disclosure. Actually, Robert interrupted carefully. The information she shared was project documentation and internal communications. Nothing confidential, nothing proprietary, nothing that violates her contract or company policy. I've reviewed everything she sent. It's all factual reporting of project statuses and business decisions. The paralegal was typing quietly, documenting every word of this conversation. Why, Dad finally asked, and for the first time he sounded tired rather than angry. Why would you blow up everything like this? You suspended me for doing my job. You sided with Natalie when she made promises she couldn't keep, and you blamed me for being honest about realistic timelines. I kept my voice steady, refusing to let emotion creep in. Yesterday wasn't the first time, Dad. It was just the final time. So you sabotaged the company. I documented reality. If reality is damaging, maybe the problem isn't with my documentation. Natalie made a sound of disgust. You're just mad because Dad gave me a leadership position. You've always been jealous that I'm older, that I got to work with him first, that he trusts me more. The laugh escaped before I could stop it. Trust. He trusts you to make promises you can't keep. He trusts you to take credit for other people's work. He trusts you to prioritize your ego over the company's success. That's enough, Dad said sharply. You're right, it is enough. I stood gathering my portfolio. Robert, I'll expect the paperwork for the severance and stock options by end of business today. You have my lawyer's contact information. Wait. Dad's hand came up, a gesture that had always meant stop. Listen, Obey. We can work this out. Take a few weeks to cool down and we'll discuss how to move forward. There is no moving forward. Not here. I moved toward the door, then paused. You built something incredible, Dad. Morrison Tech was everything you dreamed it could be. You should probably figure out how to keep it that way instead of letting it crumble, because you can't admit your favorite child isn't qualified for the role you gave her. Natalie's face went pale. How dare you? The Hamilton project launches in 6 weeks, I said, turning back to face them. It's the biggest contract the company's ever landed. Development has been working on it for 8 months. James Chen is leading the team, and he's brilliant, but he needs support from management who understands technical realities. I looked directly at my father. Natalie promised the client they could have additional features that weren't in the original scope. Those features would require another 4 months of development and twice the current budget. The client thinks they're getting them in 6 weeks because that's what she told them. Robert's face went even paler than Natalie's. The documentation is all in the shared drive under Hamilton Project Scope Specifications, Timeline Analyzes, Resource Requirements, and the email chain where Natalie made promises without consulting development. I adjusted my portfolio. You can fire James for telling you the same truth I did, or you can fix the situation before it turns into a lawsuit. Your choice. I walked out while they were still processing that information. The elevator ride down felt surreal. I'd worked in this building for 6 years, walked these hallways hundreds of times, built relationships and projects, and a career I've been proud of. All of it was ending because I told the truth and refused to apologize for it. My desk had already been cleared, but I stopped by development on my way out. The team was clustered around James's office, clearly having witnessed enough drama to piece together what was happening. You're really leaving, Sarah? One of my senior developers looks stricken. I am, but you're in excellent hands. I caught James's eye. Trust yourself. You know what you're doing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The Hamilton project he started is documented thoroughly. Stand your ground on the timeline. Don't let them push you into making promises you can't keep. I addressed the whole team. You're the best developers I've ever worked with. You built something incredible here. Don't let anyone diminish that or take credit for your work. There were tears and hugs and promises to stay in touch. I meant every assurance I gave them, but I also knew that walking out that door meant severing most of these connections. People would feel caught between loyalty to me and loyalty to the company. Most would choose the company because that's where their paychecks came from. The lobby felt like a gauntlet. Employees I'd worked with for years watched me leave, some with sympathy, others with curiosity, a few with barely concealed satisfaction at witnessing executive drama. I made it to my car before the shaking started. Adrenaline had carried me through the confrontation, but now the reality of what I'd done crashed over me. I quit my job, burned bridges with my family, destroyed my relationship with my father, and guaranteed I'd never speak to my sister again. The smartphone buzzed with a text from Jennifer at the recruitment firm CEO, wants to meet you at 2. Send me your portfolio. I sent her the documentation file, the same one I'd shared yesterday, minus the internal email chains, project summaries, development achievements, revenue growth, team leadership examples. My career reduced to a PDF ready to be evaluated by strangers who would decide if I was worth their time. Donald the lawyer called as I was pulling out of the parking lot. Robert Chen just contacted me. They want to negotiate. Nothing to negotiate. The contract is clear. They're worried about the Hamilton project. Apparently, your assessment about the scope creep was accurate, and they're facing a potential lawsuit if they can't deliver what was promised. Not my problem anymore. They want you to consult through the project completion. Premium rate, flexible schedule, no direct reporting to family members. I almost laughed. So they want me to fix Natalie's mess while she takes credit for it. They want you to prevent a 7-figure lawsuit. The offer is compelling. The answer is no. Donald was quiet for a moment. You're sure this could be a bridge back if you change your mind later? I don't want a bridge back. I want out. Then I'll handle the severance negotiation. They'll probably try to reduce the stock option valuation, but we have documentation showing the accurate assessment. The rest of the day passed in a blur, meeting with Jennifer and her client, discussing the new position, negotiating salary and benefits that exceeded what I'd been making at Morrison Tech, tour of their facilities, introduction to the team I'd be leading, conversation about vision and growth strategy. By 5 o'clock, I had a formal offer letter and a start date 2 weeks away. The severance paperwork arrived at Donald's office by 6. Robert had included a confidentiality agreement that would prevent me from discussing the reasons for my departure. Donald sent back a revised version that would prevent the company from disparaging me to future employers or clients. They agreed by 8. The stock options transferred by end of business the next day. $430,000 deposited into my account. 6 years of accumulated equity suddenly liquid. Add the severance package, and I had enough financial cushion to take my time settling into the new role without stress. Dad called once more that week. I let it go to voicemail. His message was brief. I don't understand why you're throwing everything away. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. I deleted it without responding. The Hamilton project imploded exactly the way I predicted. 3 weeks after I left, the client received the news that the features Natalie had promised weren't possible in the original timeline. They threatened legal action. Morrison Tech had to negotiate a settlement that included refunding a portion of the payment and extending the deadline by 6 months. James called me during the crisis asking for advice. I walked him through the technical solutions, helped him create a presentation for the client, coached him through the difficult conversations with management. He handled it brilliantly, but the damage to Morrison Tech's reputation had already been done. 2 board members resigned. 3 clients moved their business to competitors. The company's valuation dropped by 18%. Natalie got demoted from client relations to special projects, a meaningless title that kept her on payroll without giving her authority to make promises. Dad hired an outside consultant to restructure the management team. The consultant's report apparently included scathing assessments of nepotistic hiring practices and inadequate accountability measures. I heard all this through professional networks and former colleagues who reached out despite the obvious awkwardness. The Shad and Freya should have felt satisfying, but mostly I just felt sad. Morrison Tech had been something special, and watching it struggle felt like mourning a relationship that should have worked, but never quite did. My new position exceeded expectations. The team was talented. The executive leadership actually listened to technical assessments, and nobody expected me to clean up messes created by incompetent family members. 6 months in, we'd launched 2 major products and secured contracts with 4 Fortune 500 companies. I bought a bigger house, adopted a dog, started dating someone who worked in an entirely different industry and had no connection to tech or family drama. Life moved forward in ways that felt healthy and sustainable. A year after I left Morrison Tech, Dad showed up at my house unannounced. He looked older, smaller, somehow diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical size. "Can I come in?" he asked. When I opened the door, I considered refusing, but curiosity won. Sure. We sat in my living room, the silence stretching awkward between us. My dog, a rescue mutt named Cooper, examined Dad with suspicious interest before settling at my feet. The company's struggling, Dad finally said. "We lost 2 more major clients last month. Revenue is down 30% from when you left." "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you?" He looked at me directly for the first time. "You destroyed everything I built." "No, Dad." I documented what was already happening. You destroyed it by refusing to see reality. Natalie made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. She made mistakes repeatedly, and you enabled her every time. You chose protecting her ego over protecting your company. He was quiet for a long moment. She's my daughter. So am I. The words hung in the air between us, carrying weight neither of us had acknowledged before. I know. His voice cracked slightly. Your mother used to tell me I was too hard on you, too easy on Natalie. I thought she was imagining things, seeing favoritism that wasn't there. It was there. I know that now. He rubbed his face tiredly. The consultant's report was illuminating. Apparently, I've been displaying systematic bias favoring the elder daughter while holding the younger to unrealistic standards. Her exact words sounds accurate. I came here to ask if you'd consider coming back not to your old position. As COO, full authority over operations seat on the board, equity stake that would make you a major shareholder. The offer hung between us, tempting in ways I hadn't expected. The company my father built, the legacy he'd created, the opportunity to fix what had gone wrong. No. Dad's face fell. Just like that. You won't even consider it. I don't need to consider it. I have a position I love. Working with people who respect my expertise, building something new. Why would I go back to constantly proving my worth to people who've already decided I don't have any? Because it's family. Family should be the place where you don't have to prove anything, Dad. Family should be the people who see your value even when you mess up. You gave that unconditional acceptance to Natalie, but you never gave it to me. He was quiet, staring at his hands. I failed you. Yes, you did. Is there any way to fix that? I thought about it honestly, searching for an answer that felt true. I don't know. Maybe eventually, but not by offering me a job to save your company. If you want a relationship with me, it can't be transactional. What would it look like if it wasn't transactional? It would look like you acknowledging what happened without trying to justify it. It would look like you respecting my decisions even when they disappoint you. It would look like building something new instead of trying to resurrect something that's already dead. Dad nodded slowly. That sounds hard. Most worthwhile things are. He stood to leave, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished in your new position. I've heard good things about the work you're doing. Thank you. The words felt inadequate but genuine. Can I call you sometime? Not about business, just to talk. Maybe. We'll see. He left and I closed the door behind him, leaning against it while Cooper pressed against my legs in silent support. The conversation should have felt like closure, but instead it felt like an opening. Not reconciliation exactly, but the possibility of something new built on honesty instead of obligation. Natalie never reached out. Through various channels, I heard she'd left Morrison Tech entirely and moved to California. Supposedly she was working in real estate somewhere. Her ability to make optimistic promises might actually be an asset. Morrison Tech continued struggling, but survived, eventually stabilizing as a smaller, more focused company. Dad brought in professional management and stepped back from daily operations. The company would never reach the heights it once had, but it would endure. My career flourished in ways I hadn't imagined possible. 3 years after leaving Morrison Tech, I was recruited to lead innovation strategy at a major tech corporation with global reach. 5 years after that, I launched my own consulting firm specializing in helping family businesses navigate succession planning and management transitions. The irony wasn't lost on me that I become an expert in the exact dynamics that had destroyed my relationship with my own family business. Dad and I spoke occasionally, carefully building something that resembled a relationship. We had dinner every few months, conversations that stayed safely away from work and focused on books, current events, and his reluctant attempts at retirement hobbies. He never apologized explicitly, but his actions showed growth. He attended my wedding 3 years after our living room conversation, walking me down the aisle and giving a toast that acknowledged his failures as a father without making the day about him. He sent birthday cards with handwritten notes instead of generic signatures. He asked about my life with genuine interest instead of looking for opportunities to offer advice. It wasn't the relationship I'd wanted as a child, but it was honest and real, built on acceptance rather than expectations. Looking back, getting suspended was the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced a confrontation I'd been avoiding for years, pushed me out of a situation where I was undervalued and into opportunities where I could thrive. The cost was high, family relationships fractured, a career I'd invested in, abandoned, certainly traded for risk. But on the other side of that upheaval was freedom, success, and the profound relief that comes from no longer apologizing for taking up space. Sometimes the most dramatic revenge is simply refusing to play the game anymore. Walking away isn't giving up. It's recognizing that your presence in someone else's story isn't required for you to have a compelling story of your own. My father wanted me to apologize to keep the peace and maintain appearances. Instead, I chose honesty and accountability even when it meant losing everything I built within his company. That empty desk and resignation letter represented more than leaving a job. They represented choosing myself, valuing my expertise, demanding respect, instead of begging for scraps of approval. The lawyer's pale face and Dad's dying smile weren't about corporate drama or family betrayal. They were about reality finally becoming visible to people who'd spent years refusing to see it. I didn't destroy Morrison Tech. I simply stopped protecting it from the consequences of its own dysfunction. The company's struggles after my departure weren't my responsibility to prevent or my failure to accept. They were the natural result of poor management, nepotism, and refusal to prioritize competence over comfort. My sister smirked that morning because she thought she'd won. She'd gotten me suspended, demonstrated her influence over Dad, put me in my place after years of being competent and achieving things she couldn't match. But victory isn't about who gets suspended or who gets favored. It's about who builds a life they're proud of, who surrounds themselves with people who see their value, who creates success that doesn't require diminishing others. I have that now. A career I love. Relationships based on mutual respect. A life where my accomplishments speak for themselves instead of being constantly measured against someone else's comfort. That's the real ending to this story. Not the dramatic exit or the company's struggles or even the tentative reconciliation with my father. The ending is me 5 years later sitting in my own office with my own team building something meaningful without constantly looking over my shoulder for approval that was never going to come. Sometimes you don't get the apology you deserve. Sometimes the people who should recognize your worth never will. Sometimes family means pain instead of support. But you always get to choose what happens next. You can keep fighting for recognition from people determined not to give it, or you can redirect that energy toward building something new with people who already see what you're capable of achieving. I chose the latter, and I've never regretted it for a moment.